My name is Manish Goel.
And I'm Greg Newman.
So I'm the CEO and co-founder for TrustSphere.
And I'm the unofficial chief storyteller and sometimes product manager for people analytics at TrustSphere.
Once in a while, right?
Once in a while.
So Greg and I are going to talk to you about a topic that we're both very passionate about, which is organizational network analytics. Can I get a quick show of hands? Who here is familiar with O&A or has Who here has used O&A in their own organizations? Oh, a few of you there. That concerns me. And a few. Don't ask no hard questions from the back, please. And who of you are thinking of exploring O&A or using O&A potentially? Yeah, quite a few hands there as well. So what we're going to talk about, one of the things that I've seen in conferences as they've evolved is we've talked a lot about what O&A is. We've talked a little bit about, and people have been talking about how O&A occurs. What we're going to talk about today is a little bit of both of those, give you a little bit of an idea as to what O&A is, how it works, but also how it's being used by clients. And so the beginning part, I'll give you a little bit of theory and a little bit of background on O&A, and then Greg will talk about
how our customers are using it to do super cool things.
Yeah, sure. So after that, we'll leave a little bit of time for questions as well, we hope. So that's us. We're going to start with from a network analytics perspective, there's a great report that Accenture put out. And what they showed was there's around $3 trillion worth of value that's tracked within organizations, but from a people analytics perspective. And if you look at this group here in particular, it's incumbent on us or this particular community to see how we can unlock a lot of that value. Interestingly enough, the same survey showed that 92% of employees are willing to have that data analyzed and leveraged as long as it provides some level of benefit back to themselves. So contrary to the popular belief that employees don't want data to be analyzed, 92% of employees, and this is on a sample of 14,000 people, are interested in that. The communication infrastructure within an organization is one such data source. And if you look at what we're doing at TrustSphere, it's really being able to analyze the networks that exist for an organization from the communication flows that exist. A couple of things I'll mention fairly quickly. One, we don't touch content, so we never analyze content. Secondly, we never analyze subject lines, even in email or instant messaging. What we're doing is understanding the networks that exist. And you've all heard the saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know. We say it as it's not only what you know, but also who you know that matters. And in particular, what we're doing is from a network analytics perspective, I think I've gone one step. That's all right. What we're doing, there you are, David, there's one for you. What we're doing from a network analytics perspective is really trying to resolve for enterprises a large number of the problems that otherwise have prevented them from performing network analytics. And a number of those have been around scale in particular. How do you actually understand scale? How do you actually handle ethics and privacy? And thirdly, how do you actually apply the analytics in a business context to provide real business value? But what we're doing under the covers, so if you understand the networks there, what we're doing under the covers is we're understanding how the networks exist within an organization. A little bit of technical terms here. What we're doing is understanding within a graph, each person is a node. What we're looking at is the connection between them, which is called a tie. What TrustSphere is doing is measuring the strength of each of those ties, and we're doing it based on the communication flows. And the sorts of things that we look at, you see, we represent that as thick or thin lines. In fact, within our technology, we represent it as a score between 0 and 50. What we're doing is looking at things like, how long have I known you? How frequently do we correspond? Do you write to me when I write to you? How quickly do you respond? Are you in the to or the CC field? Each of which gives us an indication as to whether or not it's a weak tie or a strong tie. And the example there is, who here uses LinkedIn? Everybody? I thought so. Who has over 1,000 connections on LinkedIn? Yeah, of course. How many of those are real relationships? Small number? Yeah. What we typically find with our clients, they talk about 10%. So what we're really doing is understanding the difference between what we call the strong ties in the way an organization, the relevant ties in an organization, and the weaker ties. And we think that from a leadership perspective, this is particularly important. So for leaders are connectors, leaders are connectors, they're motivators. Everyone talks about this notion of the holy grail of IQ and EQ. What our view is, there's a third lens that's missing, and that's around RQ. It's the relationship quotient. So it's not just about it's not just about your intellect, not just about your empathy levels, but also around your connectivity. And that connectivity doesn't get measured at the moment. And that's one of the things that TrustSphere is working towards, which is how do we actually start to quantify and apply a consistent metric from an RQ perspective. So what stopped network analysis being sort of widespread in the marketplace? There's a number of challenges, particularly at the enterprise level. Another question, who here works for an enterprise or a government with sort of over 2,000 employees? Yeah, a lot of you. There's a number of challenges that exist for that. Again, our approach at TrustSphere has been to work with that particular community to address the problems. Some of the ones that we look at is how do we actually get insights without analyzing content? Another one is how do you actually continuously analyze the network rather than via surveys? And surveys are great, and surveys have been around for a long time from a network analytics perspective. But the trace data that we're using gives you a continuous stream of understanding how the networks operate. That allows you to then operationalize the data. So we have the ability to take that data on a real-time basis and feed it back into operational systems, including talent management systems, as well as CRM systems, for example. That allows us to reduce the time to insight so we can get the insights out fairly quickly. But most importantly, there's two things that we see as being barriers to date for large-scale network analytics adoption, and these are two that we've been working very hard to fix. One is around employee trust, and the second one is around GDPR and GDPR being compliant with GDPR. So let me address that first. I mean, the first one from a GDPR perspective, for those who, again, question, who here has read GDPR or first of all, who's familiar with GDPR? Who's actually read the whole text of GDPR? I'm pretty close to it. So we comply under Article 6.1(f). So under 6.1(f), there's what's called a legitimate interest exception. And so our clients, and we have a number of European clients who've taken this to their chief data privacy officers and have signed off that under 6.1(f), we can comply with GDPR by even analyzing communication data. But just because you can doesn't mean you should. And so the second part of that, I think, is much more, and which is even more important, is the use of the data in an ethical way. So for us, ethics is about being transparent with your employees about what you're doing, and importantly, what you're not doing, why you're using the data, and what you're not using the data for. Second thing's around giving them value. I think it's incumbent on groups like our group here to be able to sell the value of the analytics that we do back to individual employees. Share with them why we're doing it and where the benefits are, again, back to them. And the last one's around democratizing data. How do you get the data? How do you get this wonderful analytics back into the hands of individuals? One of the things that we've developed is a mobile app, which effectively allows, if you think of your relationship network as an asset, it allows you to take that asset and start to actually manage your asset, your relationship network, better. At a high level, what we're doing is we're taking data from email, we're taking data from collaboration systems, we're taking data from archives, we're putting it through in the middle there, our analytics engine, and we're then using this either as what I'd call an organizational MRI, to give you an analytical view as to how the organization functions. Or secondly, operationalizing the data, so integrating into talent management systems such as Visio, also into CRM systems such as Salesforce. We're working, of course, with a number of the consulting partners as well. But really, the important part is how are clients actually using it, and where do they get value from network analytics? So we've brought this into three sort of large groups. One is around leadership and talent. Second one's around diversity and inclusion, and on D&I, it's easy to measure diversity. Networks give you a very interesting view on inclusiveness of an organization. And the third one's around network of teams, and it goes from identifying influences all the way through to supporting mergers and acquisitions and understanding whether teams are actually integrating or not. We've built a little bit of a roadmap as well. For a lot of our clients ask us, where do we start? We're really interested, but how do we get started on this? So we've built a roadmap, which I'll come back to in a little while after I have Greg talk about a few of the examples here. So.
Thank you very much. So I've got about 17 and a half hours of stories about how customers are using our data, so settle in. We're going to be here for a while. No one's ever pushed me off the stage yet, but I think today could be my first day. I'll stay here as long as you're interested. So we do a whole lot of work with really cool companies all around the world who have gone past using their traditional set of HR data to do very traditional analytics, and they're looking for a way to add in more business contextual data, real-time data to change the way they run analytics. And starting really with it's always a surprise when you get the slide you weren't expecting. So starting with one of our most simple applications, which is identifying influencers. If you're running a global change program, you're trying to drive new system adoption, or you're looking at supporting business transformation, and you're sitting in head office, you then try and build a global change team who can support you in this type of work. But it's very hard to know who are the influencers in Brazil and Singapore and Russia. It's very hard to get a view of what's going on in those parts of the organisation. So this is some work we did with a global bank. Our head office was about 6,000 people, and they had traditionally relied on about 800 managers as their change champions. And those people were selected because they were managers, not because they were influential, not because they were well-liked or good communicators. They just said, these are the right people for us to deliver change. So what we did is we used our network activity score to look through everyone in head office and say, who are the real influencers? Who are the people who have large networks, that are really active, that have a lot of strong relationships? So we were able to identify just 300 people hidden throughout the business. So that's a big improvement for them in terms of who do they have to train, who do they have to retain, who do they need to operationalize or get activated every time they have a change program. So this is a sort of example for a lot of our customers, a starting point. It can be a one-off project, a one-off analysis to prove the value, and then we start looking at the technology as a platform after that. The simplest application we have, though, is our onboarding tool. So if you imagine rebuilding the network of someone who's left your organisation is going to take 3 to 5 years if they're a high performer. And when you join a company, often you're replacing someone, and they'll say, this is John's desk, that's John's car park, this is John's old iPhone, welcome to the company, sit there. What they don't tell you is, who did John work with? Who were the people that John was using and working with and collaborating to be awesome at their job? So what we enable our customers to do is run a simple handover report. This gives you all of the working relationships that an employee has. So a manager and a new employee will sit and work through this list, prioritize these relationships. Some will be internal, some will be external. And then the employee can then jump on the mobile app and watch these relationships grow. So we published a case study with Burson by Deloitte, one of our customers using this to do sales teams onboarding, because we know the data is never in the CRM. The data of their territory is here. And there's a good chance that salesperson is trying to take all those relationships to their new employer. So here they are, listed out, all of the relationships a salesperson is going to need to build. Another weak point in a lot of organisations is identifying the future leaders, identifying high potential employees. So, example here, a global telco organisation, they had a high potential program, but who got on it was pretty much at a manager's discretion. At the end of every performance review, the manager said yes or no to someone being a hypo. So we said, rightio, we can build a model, we can build a benchmark to look at how your high potential employees behave. So we took the top 25% of their existing hypos and we looked at how did they work? Who do they build relationships with? What parts of the business do they work with? How broad are their networks? How strong are their relationships with their managers? How many people below them do they work with? And we established a model of the way these people behaved. The headline in this telco was that their great high potential employees sustained 40% more working relationships than regular employees of the same seniority doing a similar job, right? So we could then go out, and in this case, they use our report to go back to the manager and say, this year, here's 3 or 5 people in your team who we think, on a social capital measure, are acting like high potential employees. We're not telling you that they should be selected for the program, but here we are as HR giving you some data you've never seen before that's treating everyone equally, that's enabling us to have a level playing field. And we find these amazing hidden stars throughout the business. Another piece of work, measuring the behaviours of leadership development programs. So this is with a global fast-moving consumer goods company. They've run leadership programs forever, and they've never really known whether they worked, whether they had a sustained impact. So with this client, fast-moving consumer goods, we measure the behaviour of leaders at a level in the organisation where they no longer hire externally. So they're saying these are the people we're developing for the future, and we want them to collaborate. We want them to have broad global networks. We want them to be autonomous of their manager, but have strong relationships with their team. These are the behaviours we know make a good leader in our organisation. So what we do is we produce simple network summaries that for the leaders, for the first time in their career, shows them their network in the organisation. And then as the program develops, every 2 months, they get to see how their networks are changing. So we recently, I can actually name this because we presented this at Wharton People Analytics a couple of weeks ago. So this is work from McKesson, who are the 6th largest company in America, large healthcare provider. So we've been doing some really exciting work with them, looking at how network data can be applied to a whole range of processes within their company. So what's super cool, 25,000 employees. In 100 days, it was 130 million email messages that we analysed. So it's a big set of data. Then it's about focusing in on where the real business problems are, rather than looking at just a big abstract map. So this is, within one part of their sales organisation, how their salespeople are building networks. The traditional wisdom is that a salesperson builds a lot of external networks. The more external relationships they have, the more they sell. What we could show was that it's a ratio of external networks, which create opportunities, and internal relationships, which solve problems and close deals. So when your customer says, can you deliver it on Monday? Can you drop the price by $5? Can you relabel it? Can you change the colour? You need internal people who will help you process those changes and get the changes approved and keep that deal online. So we could show them that the more internal relationships a salesperson had as a ratio to their external, the more successful they were and their team was. Then we dived into the sales teams to look to say, what are the relationships that a sales manager should have, right? And what are the right relationships for an individual seller to have? My favourite part about this is we contrasted low and high performing teams selling roughly the same product in the same geographic market. And what we could see was that a high performing sales manager, hang on, I haven't had too many coffees today. A high performing sales manager, starting on the right, a high performing sales manager doesn't have a large external network. A good sales manager is managing their team. A bad sales manager, in their case, low-performing sales manager, either, in the customer's analysis, either that sales manager is so worried about hitting their targets that they're jumping in and selling themselves, so they're getting out in the market, they're creating deals and opportunities, or as they suspect, they've promoted a great salesperson and hoped they'd turn into a great manager. And the data shows that these people are really focused on their external networks. Their high-performing sales managers are really focused on managing their teams. So the opposite, if you look at the sales reps, obviously a high-performing sales rep has a larger external network, but also they have more relationships above them in the hierarchy. And the customer's interpretation there is that's about solving problems. That's about getting changes approved. That's about getting pricing changes approved. And that's what's helping their sales reps sell. Then we started to look at turnover. So not predicting individuals, whether they're going to leave or not leave, that's for a whole nother slideshow. What we're looking at here is what is the impact on a team when people leave? How much does it impact the working relationships of the people that remain? So what you've got On that outside graph, the light green is a low turnover team, right? So a balanced network, everything's in proportion. And then as your team suffers more and more turnover, the network starts to shrink. People are literally less engaged with other people within the organisation. And how the customer, again, is interpreting that is that's what leads to the attrition sustaining and keeping going once the rot sets in. The other really interesting thing is the high turnover team has a much larger external network than a low turnover team. And that is, they believe, that little gap is their biggest attrition risk. Those people who are in a high turnover team with high external networks are the biggest flight risk they have. We can then look at high potential employees. So not all employees are equal, obviously. The people that you're really focused on as your high potential employees, but what if a high potential employee is in a high turnover team? So again, we see that balanced network there of high potential employees in light green, and we can see high potential employees in a high turnover team. High potential employees in a high turnover team have much smaller networks. High potential employees in a low turnover team are much closer to regular employees' networks. So being in a high turnover team, the question they're now asking at McKesson is, do we want to move people into high turnover teams to bring high potential people's big networks in? Or do we want to maybe take them out if the team's turnover is high so we don't lose the high potentials as well? So this is my favourite slide. So this is the difference between a high-pose network if they're in a high turnover team or a low turnover team. So we can see the impact on how well they're building relationships. And again, we see the high turnover team, the high potential employees have much stronger external networks. Is that the people they used to work with, the people that have already left the organisation? Are they pulling them out the door after them? Again, this is some data that McKesson are focusing in on to work out where they really want to do their attrition prediction. So this next work is with a large financial services organisation. We were brought in to see, do the networks that female employees build impact their promotability? Because the problem they had as an organisation was they had 50-50 intake, male and female at a graduate level, 94% male leadership team. So what we're looking at to see is, are male and female networks different, and is that impacting promotability? And so we can see, it's a bit hard to see, but the data from this analysis showed that if a female has been promoted, they always, in this organisation with their network, they always had at least 2 strong relationships with the most senior level of the organisational hierarchy. So how the customer have interpreted that is it's not enough to have people in an ERG, it's not enough to have executive mentoring. They need to have seen these people work and perform before they'll go into bat for them at a promotion discussion and say that Sarah or Sally deserves this promotion. So the initial way the customer started looking at this was, wow, there's a whole lot of stuff here we can do to fix female networks. And then after a couple of weeks of discussing it, they said, actually, I think we're looking at this the wrong way. These females are high performers, they're talented, they're productive, they're not doing anything wrong. The problem they have in their organisation is that their senior leaders only work with other senior leaders and they don't get any visibility of these people. So in this organisation, they're a long tenure organisation, a Wall Street firm. If you've been in the organisation more than 10 years, you don't work with anyone, or very, very few people, with less than 5 years tenure. So that's good. It's a whole lot of people who solve problems the same, think the same, have been in the industry the same amount of time, probably play golf on the same golf courses. They're not getting access to diversity of thought. They're not hearing about what are the millennials thinking, what are the Gen Xers thinking. They're not getting any access to anyone who thinks differently to themselves. And so what they're now doing is putting this into their leadership summaries so that leaders for the first time are shown what their network is, where it's strong and where it's weak. And we're not saying that a leader's network is wrong. It clearly got them so far into the business. But if I'm inclined to make my network more inclusive, where do I start? Do I start by building working relationships with females lower in the hierarchy? Do I need to build more relationships with other senior females? And we give this to a leader as their own network, and then a comparison to other leaders who are in a similar position to them in the organisation. That's all I've got for today. We're downstairs. If you want to talk to me, I love talking. Come downstairs. I'm happy to keep talking. And I do have about 5 or 6 network analytics jokes. I won't give them to you right now, but come down if you really want to hear them.
Thank you, Greg. Almost. Thank you, Greg. What clients often ask us is, where do we start? So we have an interest in network analytics. How do we start? How do we get started? So again, the journey map that we were describing before, the first thing we always say to our clients is, first and foremost, let's just find a business problem that matters to the business, right? Something simple. Start with something fairly simple. An example of that is just simply identifying influences, and then work back towards things which are a little bit more complex. Again, starting in a simple way allows you to start to demonstrate the results back to the organization around network analytics. It also starts to show the organization that it's not scary. I know that one of the perceptions around network analytics, particularly passive network analytics, is that it can be creepy. Again, I hope we've been able to demonstrate to you today that the approach that we've taken is to actually empower individuals with the data, with objective, unbiased data, which allows them to alter the way or nudge the way that they work actually at an individual level. It allows you to get objectivity from a team perspective. And if you're looking at supporting major transformation, allows you to understand how an organization is actually functioning rather than just perceptions. With that, do we have time for a couple of questions?
You said that network analytics has to watch out not to be creepy, but at the same time, it has to be kind of accurate. So how do you approach that question or that issue to be not being creepy, but yet having the right and the best data set?
You go first.
I'll take it. Then you can give your version of it.
I'll correct you.
Yeah, so one of the things that we're data purists. So again, if you go back to the way that we're collecting data, we're collecting it from at the server level. So generally speaking, for an organization, we're collecting what I describe as N equals all. So we're getting all the data. Because it's unbiased data, it's observed data. Again, from the non-creepy perspective, because it's not intrusive in terms of what we're picking up, we're actually getting a fairly clean view as to how an organization is actually functioning rather than just perceptions. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that does.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I add one bit to that? It's also about understanding what the network is. So the networks we're measuring are about working, innovating, and sharing expertise. So when we start to talk about this is your network, it's not your friend's network, it's not your social network, it's the people you create value with within the organisation. So keeping that in mind before you see anything is important to get the fit right.
We spoke at the start about this whole frequentist approach and how we get our past data to predict what's going on in the future. When you're doing this sort of analysis, how much do you take into account what the data's saying, and how much do you take into account what your knowledge is? Because the way I see it, people sometimes are frequentists, but they talk about Bayesian analysis as well.
Yeah.
So how do you strike that balance the more and more you do this sort of work?
No, it's a really good question. In fact, something I wanted to raise. We think this is another lens, and it should inform decision making. It shouldn't replace decision making. So what this does is, the real power of network analytics is it allows you to get an objective view as to what the networks look like, but it starts to inform the decisions. And what we're finding with our clients is, particularly if looking at solving a specific business problem, you'll get a number of perceptions around how the organization is either collaborating or how it's operating or who the influences are in an organization. By being able to take this data and provide, you sort of layer it objectively across the entire organization, it allows you to inform the debate that goes on, but it should never replace the debate. So it needs to be a combination of both, and that's certainly germane to the way we operate.
Okay. Manish, Greg, thank you very much. And you're around for the 2 days.
Thanks. Yeah.